I see them marching up north, maybe.
Mhm.
So what I've said to a lot of people is the county, Tillamook County, is at least paying attention. If it
Mhm.
looks like it's coming our way, we'll at least have a seat at the table and we can say, okay, how do we do this? Or we don't like that, and then we draw in whatever kind of resistance we need to do, which is what they've done. They had a big giant meeting, a couple of them that Representative Gomberg was at, and my understanding is they came out like 9-1, don't do this, you're gonna mess up the fishing, blah, blah, blah. And the government said, thank you very much, and went right ahead.
Hmm.
So, you know, you maybe window dressing, and maybe going through the motions. But I think one of us, and somebody has to at least be at the table and say, wait a minute here, can we talk about this, or can we get a deeper dive from our citizens or something?
Mhm. Yeah, our commercial
And
fishing industry or recreational.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
both.
and that's part of the resistance has been fishing grounds. Part of it has been what's already on the seabed floor of cables and electricity and communications and all that, or would that change it? And then there's another contingent that says you're gonna ruin our view shed. And I hadn't heard that term up until a few years ago. But there is a view shed. If you sit up on a hill and you like to
Oh,
look
sure.
at, but these are out like 20 miles, so they're actually, you know, they're this big, or they're on the horizon, you really can't see them. So
Right.
that's probably less of a concern. But I can also tell you, there are the ones I've seen, and I've seen schematics and all, they're roughly twice the size of the ones in eastern Oregon. And those are big Hummers if you go over there.
Mhm.
I mean, if you fly, you know, when you fly into Portland and you drive up the gorge or something, they're just huge.
Mhm.
And when they bring them down I-5 and then up 84, you know, it takes a double flatbed truck for one of the propeller things.
Yeah, it's
And then,
wild,
and
isn't
then
it?
another one for the stand, and by the time they get up, they're like 300 feet in the air, and then this thing turns and all. They're twice that big in the ocean, as I understand
Wow.
it.
Wow.
And here they'll be floating, because on the east coast, you can anchor them because the slope out is much more gradual. So you can go out, you know, X number of miles and have only a couple of thousand feet of water. Here, like you're at 5,000 feet, where the University of Washington's node is now that's connected through Lightwave. They're at 5,000 feet, and I don't think they're more than about 3 miles out, 3 or 4 miles out. So, you know, the continental shelf on the west coast is pretty steep. So that's why these would be floating. And I learned all this by sitting through these meetings, and with, when I was on the PUD board, would come up at a meeting in Portland about every 3 or 4 months. Somebody would give an update and say, okay, here's the resistance and here's what's gonna happen, here's the numbers and blah, blah, blah. So it's very complex, but I can see the current administration, which they change in Washington, the current one is really pushing this hard. Now, if the current administration gets voted out, maybe there'll be a pause, but who knows? So yes, I'd be happy to follow up on that, and then just keep our seat at the table and ask questions if makes sense, and then report back.
Terrific. Thank you. Do you have any interest in being the alternate?
Not particularly. I will if that needs to happen, but it's not a driving force for me.
Okay.
Well, I will guarantee you that this will be an issue when I step down from this board. So you need an understudy just to keep going. And you know, when I learn something, you know, I'll report it, you
Right.
know, to the county and say, okay, here's what they plan to do next. And so we don't come in blind.
Yeah, I'll volunteer to be the alternate.
Okay.
So I'm haven't done it
Perfect.
before, but I'm curious about it, so
Oh,
it's fine.
and then we'll
It's-
get a
it's
new
really-
commissioner who gets new things.
It's fascinating technology, and listening to these engineers and people talk about it. And, you know, they've done a lot in Europe. It's not exactly new technology, but put something out in the high seas that's floating with the weather.
Mhm.
I mean, that's technology challenge for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, I
How do
hope
you
they're
keep them pointed in the right direction? Well, you know,
Right,
just swivel
right.
And aren't they
around.
tethering them to the bottom though? Aren't there supposed to be cables
Yeah.
that tether them?
Yeah, they go at least three, like a triangle, so that they don't pivot. Otherwise, you know, you've got to
right.
face into the oncoming prevailing winds.
Yeah. I hope they're building them with, you know, presumably we'll learn about this, but I hope they're building them with a plan for what to do when they're decommissioned, for how to replace
I
them,
think,
how to get rid of the,
That's a good question, and I don't know, and I think somebody, or I vaguely remember somebody asked that, and they didn't have an answer. I'm assuming it's like at one of these meetings that I went to over the last few years, I brought up the subject of battery disposal in electric cars. And we had supposed national experts, and they said, well, we haven't figured that one out yet. Well, they're commanding you, directing America to buy electric cars, and they haven't figured out what to do with the spent batteries.
Right?
So the same thing.
Yeah.
What do you do when one of these is past its useful life, and maybe you tip it over and let it sink to the bottom? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I read that it's a big problem in the places on land, the places where 20 years ago they started to put these up with no plan whatsoever for what to do with the material when it was past its useful life.
Good points. Good points all. It's not new technology because the Dutch have had windmills doing different things, grinding grain for a couple hundred years or longer. So I mean the wind is there, but bringing the electricity ashore is, not to mention water and electricity don't play well.
Yeah.
So you got to have all that protection, and then when you get on shore, then you got to hook into the grid somewhere. And there was a time about 20 years ago where PUD signed an agreement just before I got on the board to work with people who were investigating putting it off the coast right here, off Oceanside and out that way. And all it was an agreement that we will give you some information and we'll attend meetings and we'll visit with you about the electrical grid. That's all it was. But some people seized on that as PUD at the time was championing the materials off the coast, and let's get after PUD because they've made a terrible mistake. Well, it wasn't that at all, but you know how things take on a life of their own when you say that.
Sure.
So, but that was quite a while ago, but I remember that came up time and time again. Well, PUD's already committed, they're up to their neck in this stuff and blah, blah, blah. That was not true. So whatever happens down there, you have to be careful that the truth prevails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Interesting subject.
It is, truly. Okay,
Sure.
good. All right, that was easy. We have a couple more issues that Commissioner Scar added to the list. So review of retirement meeting and action items. Do you want to?
Well, I had to leave before it was over, so I was curious sort of how you all wrapped up and then just what people's thoughts were about the conversation and where we are and if there's anything that we do need to move forward. Doug, I know you're encouraging us to move forward with an RFP or an RFI, and there was some conversation there, but what did I miss in the final 20 or 30 minutes or however long y'all stayed? And
We decided to scrap the system. No, that's not
yeah,
true.
get that in the mic.
Not true
That's
at
not
all.
true.
I think, and help me, you were there, Commissioner, there's really no change to what we're doing. The three parties, which is principal and then retirement group that John runs, and then also and Millman. So those are the three that are doing what needs to be done. They're doing the investing, they're doing the actuarial service, and they're doing the custodial service and putting the money in and out and keeping track of it. And I don't think there was any appetite or any reason to change that. What I got out of that was, first of all, that what we have is not entirely broken, but we now, I think, understand it better, at least I do. And what also, the actuarial was updated, and we dropped 1 point as of July 1 from 35.8 to 34.8. And the main thing, one of the main things that I want to talk about here was if we stop the practice of paying in on whatever this budget is as of adoption in July 1, that's not going to be a material change of anything. That doesn't change unfunded liability. We're still on track. And that was a message that I asked Sean to figure that out, and how much would we save by not following that practice. In other words, wait until there's a hire in the seat or the driver's seat or whatever the job is. Then there's a 6-month waiting period, assuming we're still on this system. Now that changes when we go to PERS, but there's a fairly strong likelihood that I understood now from Jody and others that we won't have a contract with Teamsters until sometime realistically in the fall, maybe even the first of the year. And then things would be retroactive in terms of whatever salaries were adjusted. But the retirement system, instead of starting as of July 1 for PERS, could actually go the entire calendar year and not be till January or
Sure.
whenever Teamsters is all done, or not Teamsters, yeah, Teamsters. So that was part of it as well. So there's an opportunity to do something in this year's budget quickly by saying, okay, we're gonna stop paying on empty seats until we actually have a hire. And then and if it's the current system, then we do like we've always done, only not pay. If it's switching over to PERS, then you just do like we were going to do anyway, start paying into PERS after whatever waiting period there is. Other than that, I can't think of anything really significant. We didn't have enough time for John to make an elaborate presentation about stocks and bonds and all that, but we can do that another time. And I'm pretty comfortable, and I'm sure he wanted to give us his show, and he spends a lot of time. He's a really smart guy. But I just believe that the actuarial side of it, the administrative side of it, had more importance now than looking at colorful graphs and charts of the stock market. I also took away from the actuary, and I hadn't met this gentleman before, that he acknowledges we have an unusually high rate to maintain the unfunded liability, but the unfunded liability is within an acceptable range, pretty standard, and at the end of when everything plays out, the numbers will come together and we'd break even, and he's quite confident of that. So I was comfortable with that, and so I don't know, Commissioner, what you took away from that, but.
Largely the same. I thought it was, some of the things that I learned that were interesting were that when we asked, I don't remember which of you asked or who asked, whether or not other systems have a single point of service, or are they split up in different services? The guy from Millman was very clear that most of them are split up and that you wouldn't want a single point of service. So that was interesting to me, and because I know I heard Naomi say, and I think I've heard Jody say, that they were looking for a single point of service. So I thought, oh, okay, well, this is new information. So that was interesting. I think it was interesting to hear the difference between John's interpretation of, or his concerns about unfunded liability versus Millman's. Because Millman, like you said, has a formula, and they feel like we're within acceptable limits in the formula. And John was more concerned for the county regarding the unfunded liability. And I met with him after the meeting, and he said, I think you commissioners should consider, like, even though the rate dropped by 1%, he said, I think you should consider paying the same rate. So you're not, if you've, whatever you budgeted for last year, you just pay that same amount. And he suggested that we consider continuing to pay for the unfilled seats, just because he has more concern about how the unfunded liability will impact us later. So that's obviously a more conservative approach, and I think we should consider both. But I agree that it was great to hear from Millman, to hear from the actuary, and we haven't for a while. I know I've met Brent before, but it might have been before COVID. Do you remember how long it's been since he was here in person? It was a while. And so we were upstairs for sure. Yeah. And so I thought that was great. It was great to hear from him. And it was nice to be in person, and I thought it was really worthwhile. I appreciated it. I appreciated your long list of questions, and that we got through most of them. And I think it's fine to go out for an RFP or an RFI. I also agree that what we're doing is working from my perspective. So, I think financially we're fine, which is what we want. So, I know that been some discussion about, do we want to keep doing it the way we're doing it? Do we want to have quarterly meetings with John and all three of us? Do we want to have meetings with John and just one of us? We could choose a representative, we could say, Doug, you go to those meetings and we'll join you if we can, or whatever, we don't have to keep doing it the way we've been doing it. And we can consider whether we want to keep doing it the way we've been doing it in terms of us making the decisions, or if we want to assign them the fiduciary responsibility to make the decisions for us, like we talked about in that meeting. So I thought it was a good meeting. It was worthwhile. I don't mind going out for an RFP or RFI just to see what else is available, but I'm not dissatisfied with what we have. What about you?
Sean, you were there for the rest of that meeting. Do you want to add anything before I jump in? Anything that you may have picked up? Yeah.
Keeping it the same makes me feel better just because of the embedded liability. But there's cost savings. I'm sorry, my allergies are just terrible. The cost savings.
Cough.
Both.
Cost savings by not
Yeah.
sending them funds through on
Well, if he had said, the actuary had said, no, that there's some risk in doing that, he made it pretty clear that if you drop the funding of empty seats, so to speak, he didn't see any issue at all long-term with the actuarial side of it, and so I took that to mean, okay. As far as let me say one more thing about the RFP or RFI, whatever we did. It's been over 20 years. And while we appear to be satisfied because nothing has gone drastically wrong and all the checks have cleared the bank, we don't know what's out there and what other services are available. And so my judgment is that you need to test the market every so often. And our attorney who was online, I've forgotten his name already, but
Jeff.
Something.
Yes.
Jeff Kirchner.
Jeff, he recommended when I had a private meeting with him prior to, that he said 3 to 5 and 7 at the outside. And I tend to agree with that, regardless of what the commodity is. And this is a professional service, but it's a commodity too. There are lots of people who can provide this. I would at least like to test the market in the next few months there, whenever Jody gets something together that we can hand over and publish and see who responds. If we get 2 or 3 and then, it's a half day to sort some of that out, and maybe you get 5 or 6. And it wouldn't be fee-based at all, because I don't see his fee as unreasonable from what I understand. But somebody else may say, well, we do things this way and we report out this way and we've had success here and there. And we don't know that because we haven't asked for that knowledge. So my recommendation is we follow through on the RFI, and he no doubt will submit, and he may end up number 1 for a whole bunch of reasons. So then we enter into an agreement. And by the way, he sent me an agreement to sign, and I'm not going to sign it all. I'll give it to Rachel, but and I didn't read it carefully, but I'm in no position to lock in anything. That's a board decision, and I think he was asking for a written commitment, and I don't think we're there yet at all.
John was Upton?
Yeah,
Oh,
he sent me
interesting.
something, he wanted a DocuSign, thing, and so I haven't doing it. I'll send it over to you and you can sort it out.
When did he send it?
The day before we had our meeting, so it would have been, Monday?
Okay.
Maybe it might even have been Tuesday morning. So he, and his assistant, or the person over there in Lake Oswego, sent it twice, 2 different things. One was actually a recap of the investment policy. It's speaking to how much discretion he has, and is he a full fiduciary, or does he come back to us? And I don't think there's any change with that. But the other one was some kind of an agreement for services, and I didn't read it carefully because I didn't plan on signing it.
Okay. So I thought it was an interesting meeting. I thought it was a good meeting. I also keyed on basically the same things you all did. So that paying for the empty budgeted positions, I think the difference is that the actuaries feel very confident given the set of assumptions that are in their model. And I think what John's keying in on is that our assumption of a 6% rate of return inside their model may not be realistic. And so I think my feeling was John probably trying to protect us because he's looking and saying that that 6% overall, that's not going to be realistic. So our questions are, we can adjust this a couple of ways. One is to do a plan, either amendment or restatement, where we go back into our plan and acknowledge that we think our future rate of return is lower than what is currently in there, which would then drive up that number that we're going to be putting in. Or we can wait and let the market kind of ride a little bit, but go ahead and pay for empty positions or at the higher rate to protect ourselves from the expected shortfall on return on investment. So there's a couple things. We can either try to do that ourselves, or we can actually try to work it more, officially with Milliman. It sounded like 5 years ago or so, Sean, was when they did the last adjustment where they changed the mortality table and they changed the expected rate of return. And I thought he said 5 years.
It might have been a little more because it might have been more like 7 because there were 5 years. You're right about the 5 years part, but it was
stuck.
But it was going up 1% for 5 years,
Yeah.
and we haven't done that for the last year.
Couple years, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's two ways to come at it. We can either kind of figure it's not that, we're not expecting that huge of a loss, and we think we can probably just do it by paying our empty seats and doing our piece. What I will say is that Marlene has figured that out, and Marlene doesn't budget her positions. She comes and asks for them one by one because she's not going to pay for the empty seats,
Oh,
because she
interesting.
has, that's how I found out that we were paying for empty seats, is Marlene told me that. She's like, I'm not going to budget for these positions until I know I can fill them, and then I'll budget for them, but I'm not going to pay for that while I wait. So that's how I found out about it,
Smart.
and asked to start digging into it, and Doug, bless his heart, was like, well, let's figure that out.
Well, see, here's another part too. The empty seat thing only goes on until such time as Teamsters is settled and we
Correct.
begin flipping
Yep.
over,
Yep.
which theoretically will be sometime in the next fiscal year.
Right,
And so this is not a 3-year commitment, it's more like 6 months or
Right.
whatever. So I'm thinking if we're hiring 45 to 50 people a year and they're not all general fund, then maybe the general fund picks up maybe $100,000 or something, which is not chump change, but it's not a huge number just following through until the actual end of PERS starts.
Sure.
And assuming that's the first of the year, say goes all fall and then retroactive back, but nobody really gets in the system. Then you also have the 6-month waiting period for new people, so theoretically it'd be a whole year. So to me, that would make sense. However, it's not long-term, and so, it's a 1-year bump where we'd get X amount of savings, but then the whole thing folds over to PERS and it becomes just an academic conversation.
Did you say you'd asked John to come up with some
Yes,
numbers for that?
I sent her an email and
Commissioner Sparrow's down in my office. I haven't got a degree.
yeah, your email,
Okay.
sorry, that was mine.
in the general, the question was in the general fund, how much might we expect to save at the 28.7, not the 35, because the difference is the 7% that's paid by the county when you actually do have a body. So it's 28.7% times the budgeted salary times however long the period is. But it would be some, it'd probably be, maybe
6 months.
$100,000, I don't know.
At this point, given that, was it Jody who said maybe we'd conclude the Teamsters negotiations by November? I would think we should just be thinking about January 1st move to PERS.
So just status quo, keep doing what we're doing, is that
Yeah.
what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
And then when we make the change to PERS, because I think that might also be a good time to sit back down with the actuary and say, okay, now we've made this shift to PERS, now we need a more, make sure that we have an in-depth look at how this is how these two numbers are gonna come together at the end of the period, to your point, Doug. 2093, I think, was on his little chart of when the numbers come together, when theoretically the last person who's currently in the program would exit the program. And at that time, maybe that's when we have a conversation to say, what are rates doing? What is return on investment right now? Do we need to restate our assumptions underneath this plan to make sure that at the end of the day, those numbers do come together, and then set up something by which it's a required review every 5 years of commissioners or something, just given that the market is the market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no vote to be taken. It's just sort of a consensus thing if we're there.
But if we're still struggling to balance the budget, do we want to consider that savings?
I think that's a Sean question. Do you need that to balance the budget for this year? We know we have a whole different conversation for next year, but this won't be a factor next year.
I'm good, it's in balance.
Okay.
It's not great. It was a lot of going through stuff, but it's in balance.
Well done, thank you.
You guys can decide whether or not you like it or not.
Okay.
If you want me to change it and reduce retirement, or
Or what? Okay, so paying for empty positions at this point, sort of a consensus that we're moving to PERS, not make a big change.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with
But
that.
Sean
We've got
needs
a
it.
balanced budget. I do,
Right.
I like the idea that this gets an in-depth look again when that actually occurs, which might be late this year or early the following year, calendar year.
Yeah, so we can revisit in January. Okay, so that was one of the pieces. The other thing was one that Commissioner Bell, you brought up about whether it would be whether we would make the decisions or whether he makes the decisions. So I'll just speak for myself that this is not an area that I feel like I should be making the decisions in with my level of expertise. And I find it really, really irritating to spend the hour with John walking through everything for me to try to teach me enough in an hour so I can say the right thing. And I don't necessarily feel like this, and this is me, I know we all have different backgrounds, but for me, I don't feel confident that I am making the right decisions as the fiduciary. So for me, I would really prefer to have someone who has that background be the one making the decisions that I can affirm based on my, acknowledgement of their expertise, and that our RFP or RFI ensures that we are hiring the right person to do this job and make these decisions. Because I just really feel like that's, to Doug's point, he kept saying it was $1 million, however many million of somebody else's money, right? And for me to be making these investment decisions just feels like I'm way out of my league.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, maybe with the exception of Doug, I think we're all out of our league. And it's, my perspective is that I don't mind that because I always learn something from John, but additionally, he's leading us through it. He isn't just leaving it for us, like, he isn't just saying, well, what do you guys think, and then doing what we say. Like, he's leading us through what he's suggesting, and we're really being led by the nose, to arrive at the conclusion that he showed up with. So it wouldn't really be different to have him do it or to have us do it because he's telling us what he thinks we should do. It wouldn't really be different.
Unless somebody decided not to follow his advice, which I think there is. I guess I look at David actually took us in different directions a couple of times, and I had to trust that David knew what he was saying, because he would say something and John would say, well, you could actually go this way, and then we would walk over that way. And again, so and all I can do is follow. and that just, it feels like, what if we don't have a Doug or a David or someone, or have someone who thinks they know? So I just find it, I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't second guess him either. I think when you hire a professional, you expect them to make fiduciary decisions based on what the objective of the organization is, which is, number one, keep it solvent. Number two, keep the unfunded liability within the parameters set by the actuary. And number three, have everything transparent that you can see. And so in a perfect world, if I were in charge of everything, I would hire him or one of his peers from some other firm and say, okay, here's what you're going to do. And there's also a body of law as a fiduciary has to follow. And it's essentially like, X% or a range that are in fixed income, a little bit more in equities, and you don't get too far out of that ratio, or you find yourself in violation, and the liability then switches to him, big time, him or her. And the term that's used all the time is you invest for widows and orphans. That's literally what you're doing, is because you don't want to lose money and you don't want to take excessive risk. PERS has because of their size, and I only know what I read and talk to people, is they have gone into some speculative stuff. They're going into IPOs, like an initial public offering, that somebody's gonna start a new company and they're selling stock for the first time, they wanna raise a bunch of money. PERS might give them $5 million, but they've got 100 billion, B with a B. So they can do those kinds of things. We certainly can't, in my opinion. We've got to be pretty darn conservative and, you know, and understanding that it can go up and down 8 or 10 or 15% from year to year. And hopefully the graph goes up and down, but it goes up and down going while it's going up. And I think that's been the case. We're riding the economy of America. There are no investments that I'm aware of you know, some mining company in Canada or some European company nobody's ever heard of. He's bound by a pretty well-defined body of law that says if you're investing other people's money for these purposes, you have certain parameters. I would like to give him discretion within those parameters. If he goes outside of that, then there's a problem, maybe legally, financially, or whatever. But by some kind of quarterly reporting, you know, he's going to say, here's where we are, and we pay attention as fiduciaries. The other thing that has bothered me a little bit when I first got into his stuff was he uses a lot of what I call obscure indices to track this stuff. You know, the basic way you watch the stock market is the Standard & Poor 500, the NASDAQ 2000, and the Dow Jones Industrials, the stuff you see on TV and the financial channels. And if you can stay even with that or do slightly better, you've been successful. If you can't, then I would ask, well, why can't you do that? Because you can buy a market, you can go buy an index fund that is the market. That's all you have to do. You give them the money at 9 o'clock in the morning and play golf the rest of the day. It just follows the market. There's nothing, no decisions to be made. The decisions are made on Wall Street, and you just follow the market. So to try and outguess the market is almost always a fool's errand. People have been trying that for 100 years, and you know, they very seldom do it because of the macro approach to the market. So if you say to the fiduciary, in this case, John and his firm, is we want you to do this, you have discretion to move it around if you think one company or one fund, and by the way, he's investing nearly all in mutual funds. He doesn't own any, we don't own any individual stocks. There's no shares of General Motors. There's a mutual fund that owns probably Ford, General Motors, and 50 or 100 other things. And so you have the economies of scale and diversification. So I'm not at all uncomfortable with what he's doing. And yes, he knows all the numbers, and he's a numbers guy, and good for him. That's the business he's chosen, and he's good at it. So anyway, having said all that, I think he should follow the fiduciary laws in America. And if he thinks we should sell this one and buy this one, and he's still within those brackets, I don't think we need to know that day to day. He can come report that quarterly and say, well, we sold a little bit here, we sold $1 million here, and put the money over here because it had a little better track record and blah, blah, blah. Or this one changed managers and now they have a new manager over here and we think it'll do better. Those are decisions that he can make day to day or hour to hour. And I don't think we're in any position, any of us in this organization, to micromanage him at all.
Agreed, yeah, and I don't think we are micromanaging him, but if
No.
both of you want to change the nature of the relationship to give him permission to say, you know, you make the decisions and then come tell us what you did, as opposed to you have the ideas and then come tell us what you think we should do.
Well, he did that once since I've been here, I think back in February, early March, or whenever he sent something out and wanted to know if he could sell this one and buy this one. If you remember, I don't remember what the particulars were, and I thought, well, isn't that what we're paying you to analyze and make those decisions?
Yes, and I don't think we set it up in that format. The
No, we
way
didn't.
we've set it up is for him to check with us if he's making significant changes.
But like Commissioner Scar said, are we, any of us, in a position to second guess him? And I you know, I'm not, and I probably know as much as anybody on this kind of stuff as an amateur. He's a professional, and if he says, well, this one has had failing performance for whatever reason, and you'd like to go down here, then I'd say go for it.
Right, I agree with you, and I also trust him, and I would be okay with that change. So my thinking about the way that we do it currently is not that I'm going to that I want to have the right or the ability to direct John to invest in a certain thing or divest from something else. My feeling about it has been that it's an issue of responsibility, that we, the body, the commissioners, are responsible for this account. And therefore, we should be involved in it at whatever level of expertise we have or don't have. And so that has been my feeling. But we could contract with him to make the decisions and keep us informed and be involved in that way. I mean, I think it's okay. I'm just, my interest in it is that I think it's one of our chief responsibilities.
So if he came in, let's say, in a quarterly report, and instead of using the rather obscure index that he used, was more than one, and we said, okay, the Dow Jones, pick it or one or the other, the market went up 3% over the last 90 days. Did your investments follow the 3%? Yes or no? That's a fairly simple question.
Mhm.
Either you followed the market, or you did better, or you did worse.
Mhm.
And if he did worse, I would say, well, what are you gonna do to adjust that? Well, you need a longer horizon. So then he comes back in 6 months and says, okay, yeah, we still not quite keeping up with the market. Then I would ask some questions. I'd say, well, keeping with the market is pretty simple. You buy the market at 9 o'clock in the morning, and like I said, and go golfing the rest of the day. You don't have to do anything. Why do you try to outguess the market, and now for X period of time, you've lost? So either ride the market or come a little bit above it, which people can do, luck and otherwise. So that's how I would look at it, that there's nothing extraordinary or difficult about what he's doing when he's buying an assortment of mutual funds. He's got like 30 mutual funds in the portfolio. And a mutual fund, by its definition, is a diversified portfolio of a bunch of stocks.
Mhm.
So, I don't think the county's in any position to micromanage him. I think we're in a perfect position to hold him accountable against recognized standards.
Okay. In addition to that, when I met with him yesterday, he asked me, well, what are your main concerns? What can we do for you commissioners? And so I suggested to him that he reach out to each of you for individual meetings, because I couldn't speak for you about what your main concerns are, or, how he could work better with us. So he may very well be reaching out to you.
Perfect.
Okay?
Okay, so I think if we're looking at doing an RFI, just in general, it's a good opportunity at that point to also find out what it's going to take for somebody to be, what did he call it, a discretionary fiduciary.
Mhm.
Because he did say it would cost more. So I do think there is that piece of it that we need to, if we're gonna do an RFI anyway, it's a great way for us to go ahead and find out the value of that piece of it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yes, it could, because they'll spend more time researching, but, how much more, I have no idea.
Well, also, yeah, I think we want to know that, how much more.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because I don't think we're going to get better service for it.
No, and he lowered his fee from about 80 to 82,000 or whatever to 70 or 71. So he took a $10,000 drop here recently. And I thought, well, that's nice. Thank you very much. And percentage-wise, it's not much at all. If somebody is paid $70,000 to manage almost $100 million,
Right.
that's a, 0.0000 something.
Right.
And the others, if we do the RFI, and I'll talk with Jody, I would not recommend changing Milliman. They're the gold standard of
Mhm.
actuaries. They do PERS, they do, I don't know how many states and, private
Agreed.
companies. And then the principal, I don't know much about them except what I found. They're an international multi-billion-dollar AM Best rated, top of the line company based in Des Moines, Iowa. And they manage billions all over, and they're publicly traded on NASDAQ. And so I would have zero issues with them, absconding with the money or something going wrong. They know what they're doing. Now, we could add that to the RFI. I don't have an opinion on that one way or another. But I don't know, John's the one who works with them. Have you ever had any issues with them?
No. The only thing I've ever done is I go in and I approve people's retirements. After Mary Jo, HR was driving the retirement piece.
Yeah. Another thing I learned yesterday is that the management of retirement, what Mary Jo does for us now with the county retirement account, PERS does that. So we don't have to have a third-party contractor to manage the PERS accounts,
Oh.
and Mary Jo won't be doing it either.
No, but we need a third-party administrator to do the existing account if we don't want Mary Jo to do it, because we will still have active
Right.
members in our current plan. But yes,
Right.
yes, for PERS, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That is a good thing. And I would like for us to look for a third-party administrator.
Could
At
be
least
principal.
get that, yeah, it could, well, Milliman said they do third-party administration as well. So it could, so again, back to the RFI, right? So I don't, it's not necessarily a single point of contact, but it is that third-party administrator who has kind of the relationship and does those, and it's nothing to do with Mary Jo, it just makes me very nervous that we have one person who really knows how to do that, and liability-wise, having it done in-house feels to me like it would be nice to have that level of protection that says we have a contract with someone else who's responsible for a poor calculation that could end up being very, very expensive into the future.
I'd like to see what it would cost for sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would go into the RFI also.
And also,
Right.
it occurs to me that as we move to PERS, that level of responsibility for Mary Jo is just gonna go down and down and down. So,
Yeah.
so I'd like to know how much it'll cost us.
Right, yeah, because if we look at it over the next, really, the majority of our retirements, I don't think I brought their whole, did I bring their whole thing? I did. The majority of retirements for us will take, well, Mary Jo will have a lot to do for quite a while, because the majority of retirements don't actually hit until 2038. We have like fairly consistent amount through 2038, and then it sort of starts to drop off after that. So I expect Mary Jo's world won't change that much in the retirement piece, because she'll still be figuring all the active 243 folks
Yeah.
as they go.
Yeah, it occurs to me that if it is exorbitant to transfer it to a third party, that maybe we consider doing that when Mary Jo wants to retire.
Yep, let's take a look and see what the cost of that would be in the RFI, so that makes sense.
Mary Jo might be figuring her own retirement there before too long.
I think she's got like 10 more years or something, doesn't she? She and I had that conversation. She said she has like 10 more years. So,
Okay, anything else on that?
there was a question about changing the plan document for the mortality table to match the mortality table that was with Milliman. And I kind of probed at that a little bit at the break to say, does it matter? It does and it doesn't. It sounds like it doesn't, because Milliman's already built it into making sure that at the end of the day, we get to that dollar amount, or to the money ends at the same time as people's need for the money ends, even though the mortality table on the plan itself is not the same. But it does increase our liability because it's using a mortality table that is based on people not living as long as they do today. So it is a way for us to reduce our unfunded liability by acknowledging the true life expectancy of people. So I don't know if we want to look into that or not, but it was another open question I left the meeting with and had in my notes. Just, it's an interesting question.
That could be part of an RFI is whoever comes in, could be John as well. Say we want the latest generally accepted mortality tables on, even though that might not be part of his, but we go back to Milliman and say, okay, we're regrouping here, we want the current, the best practice mortality tables. And that's really more of an actuarial thing than I think it is the investment side.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Yeah, I didn't, it didn't sound to me like it's necessary that we take action on that. Do you feel differently?
I think it's another opportunity for us to find a way to reduce the unfunded liability, which ultimately, I think we do it at the same time that when we move to PERS and we do that deep dive into how does our existing plan make it from today to its closure, is the time we look at that to say, what impact does it have on that calculation? What impact does it have on how much we have to pay into our existing plan? Because if we find that, okay, now that the PERS people are going there and we're no longer feeding into the plan with new people, that our rate starts going up because it's the existing people and existing resource, that we might want to look at that as a way to keep our rate not going up so
Okay.
high. Because I think it's an internal lever that allows us to kind of adjust that,
Okay.
if I understood correctly.
All right,
So we'll put that one in the deep dive after PERS with
I'm
our.
good with that.
okay.
Okay. Thank you. I was like, this was a really important meeting and I felt like there were potential steps that we would or wouldn't take out of it. And we have just so many challenges for all of us to get back and talk about things when they're fresh. So
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you for having that conversation while it's
Yeah.
fresh. And
You're
Um,
welcome.
Doug, I know you're working with Jody on the RFI, and I'm just gonna make a few notes about the other things we talked about, so when we get to that PERS transition in January or whatever, when we go to have our next meeting on all of this, we can figure out about a deep dive.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, then the next topic was TLT increased planning. Your name is there. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and I was like, I know you're gonna take on the meeting with Orla. And I was thinking about like polling, trying to figure out, if we go for this, which I don't think we have a lot of choices based on where the budget is, this is gonna be a process to get ourselves ready. I was thinking of how long it took us to get ready for the radio project, and that we need to be thinking about this pretty holistically. And I didn't know if that was something that we wanted to have Rachel's help with, to put together a schedule of a holistic way to get us to May with this to be on the ballot in May, because there are many moving parts, obviously, of which the Orla meeting is one.
Well, if Rachel wants to work on I think you've already have a proposed timeline. Well, you proposed a timeline for if we were going to get to November, which is overly optimistic. I saw that Bill came back with, he still thinks that we need to go to the voters based on his interpretation of that language, but he doesn't know why some governments go to the voters and some don't. I just didn't feel like that was definitive. Maybe it's just a gray area in law and both interpretations are valid, but it seems clear, like if you to initiate a new tax, it says clearly you go to the voters. But it doesn't say clearly to raise the existing tax, you go to the voters. So I don't know if that's just
my interpretation is that it was because it was originally approved by the voters.
okay.
If we were doing it again, I don't know if it would have been required. I don't know if it was required or not.
Oh, in the first place? Yeah, but it doesn't say to raise it, you go to the voters, does it?
Yeah, it does. ORS 203055 says, in part, any ordinance adopted by the county and imposing taxation shall receive the approval of the electors of the county for taking effect. So actually, take that back. So that's probably why we went in the first place to raise it.
Right, but it doesn't say to raise it, we have to go
Impose a
go back.
tax.
Imposing is not raising. Or it could be,
I don't know.
maybe it's just a gray area.
Yeah. So every council has a different interpretation. I found in lots of different things, but I can see how Bill got there.
Okay,
So I think we need to put that to bed because it keeps coming up and it's just disruptive to the conversation.
well, I guess my question is, the reason that I keep disrupting us is like, is that actually necessary? Because that is a huge process that, if we didn't have to do it, it would save us a bunch of time and money. So I still would like to know why other governments don't do it. I mean, maybe,
I see Joel has turned his camera on, so
Hey,
maybe
Joel.
he has a little bit more guidance
You
for
got
us
some
as our
insight?
other council.
hi, Joel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Commissioners. So, Bill's looked into this a lot more than me, but I think, just a plain reading of the statute. I mean, I agree Bill's interpretation is the safest approach. And it's consistent with what our neighbors to the south recently did. Lincoln County took theirs to the, they took theirs to the voters, and but it does sound like there's some other jurisdictions that have done it another way. One option I can think of, because this came up in the presentation from Jason, I believe his name was, when Orla was here before. Orla is willing to provide advisory opinions on a variety of topics. And, I could reach out to them and see if they would be willing to provide an opinion on this. Because I think if someone, if there was going to be a challenge, it could definitely come within their ranks. And, it does sound, I'm sorry.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think, there is some inconsistency around the state as far as how that statute's being applied. So I'd be happy to do that if the board would like me to.
So, in recent days, I've had two lengthy conversations with people representing the tourism industry that are aware of this, and they had a little different take on it. In between those two conversations, I had another one with Bill. And here, the question that came from the industry was, how could the county raise it to whatever number, pick a number, 15%, and keep it there and keep the cities at 9%? And I said, my understanding is the cities can do whatever they want. If they wanted to go raise it to 14 or 15 or some other number, they could do that under the city charter as basically a style of home rule and their own governing documents and charter and all of that. And when I talked to Bill about that, he said, well, here's what they did in Lincoln County recently. He went and did a little more research on that. They structured an order. Lincoln County structured a ballot question that said, would you approve going to whatever the number, I don't remember the number, that would always exceed by 1% more than whatever the cities impose. And meaning that if you went to 15%, the cities could do whatever they want, but they'd still have to give 1% to the county. And that was a way that he thought to enshrine what now I think is a gentleman's agreement of the 1% going to the county. If you remember when all this started, the county went in at 10. Some of the cities were 5, 6, maybe 7, and within 18 months or so, they were up to 9. And so then that became then only 7% of the total, the 1%, and then the remainder is county. The way they stuck that in and avoided a city coming up to parity where the county wouldn't get any was by language that provided that at least 1% shall go to Lincoln County. And I don't know the exact wording, but that's what it was. And so if the county went to 18%, the city of Lincoln City could only go to 17, or if they went higher, they'd still have to give 1% to the county. And that's how they solved that problem or put it in language that's supportable under the laws and policy adopted by the voters. And so then I went back and explained that, and what the industry was trying to do is saying, how do we get more from the cities to the county? And I said, well, I'm not sure you can do that, nor should you, because they have a perfect right to manage their own affairs. Mm-hmm. And if they determine they want this amount of money and they can spend it on whatever they want, depending on where they fall under the law of the 70-30. Some of them have grandfathered clause and they can spend it all on whatever. But how we would do it, we would have some kind of language, if that's what we wanted to guarantee was the 1%, that would prevent one of the 7 cities from equaling that amount and saying, okay, well, we're going to take it all. Something to think about, and again, that might require a little more legal wordsmithing and research, but evidently that was the same conversation they had or are still having in Lincoln County.
Okay, well, that is interesting. I had wondered what is the nature of our agreement for the 1% with the cities? Is it contractual? Maybe Joel knows, or you're right, it'll take more legal work to find out.
No, I don't think there was.
Would it be the same if we increase?
Well, what this individual thought, that as soon as the county put something on the ballot, and if it's successful, then the cities would immediately, probably even without a vote, because of what they can do under their charter, they'd immediately come right up to that same level as ourselves. And so, but I told him, I said, well, the county at a certain percent, 15, would net roughly 1 million of marginal income, because even the others stayed and raised, just followed in steps and left the 1% as it is today. But maybe there's a way, or maybe we should talk about enshrining that 1%, like they're doing in Lincoln County.
Yeah, let's talk
A
about
lot of moving parts.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of to my point of a lot of moving parts, even if what we just need to do is have Rachel as a project manager get us all these questions that we need to get answered, and our timeline by which we hope to get them answered, and kind of how we're gonna get where we're going. Because I am very concerned about if we do not add revenue. I mean, we're looking at a $3 million, I was just down with Sean and Deborah looking at numbers for the 5-year projection that they're gonna bring to the budget hearing, and we're looking at a $3 million shortfall next year if we add $1 million of TLT. There's $3 million beyond that we will have to find, because we're balancing it this year on savings, right? So we have to, we have to make sure this gets across the finish line for the 25-26 year. And so I'm just concerned we're sitting here now, if we have to get it ready for the ballot and all those pieces, starting with, does it even have to go to the ballot? And what about the 1%? We just have a lot of moving parts. So I would like to, workload pending, ask Rachel to help us get a work plan together that we can do, so we can figure out what are these key pieces we need to know to even make our decision if we're balloting or if we're ordinancing, and then walk us through that whole thing, whichever it is.
Sure. Yeah, workload pending, sure. Yeah, and my plan was to organize the industry group after, I'm done transitioning with Dan. So probably June, yeah, this summer. So, yeah, that'll be. And then I would think, I'm anticipating that out of that will grow marching orders, so to speak, for how much more outreach do we need to do? You know, if we start out with the group that Jason Brandt recommended, then how much beyond that, how much more outreach do we need to do to engage with people? So I don't anticipate that the outreach would be as extensive as the short-term rental committee, for example. But, certainly we don't want to, we're always going to say, oh, I didn't even know you guys were doing that. I mean, we're always
Somebody
going
will,
to hear
yeah.
that. We're always going to, but I think we need to make the effort to communicate with people.
Right. And I think polling is another piece to look at. Is there, what's the once we decide, I mean, I guess either way, because I'll try to finish one whole sentence. Sorry, my brain's running in different directions. Polling to see from the general public, are they on board? Find out, how are they on board for 5%? Are they on board for 10%? Just to get an idea of what the feeling is that's out there, to know, because if they're on board, whether we go to the voters or whether we do an ordinance, it lets us know what our likely opposition is if they wanted to challenge our ordinance to the ballot, right? So I think either way, it's useful to know and to get an idea at that number that we're targeting. Because taking it up 5% is great, $1 million is great. It still leaves us with a structural $3 million hole that will grow each year, become a 4.5, become a 6. So this isn't going to be our only solution, obviously. And I think that's the other piece, is we need to make sure we've got a plan going on this solution, because we're going to have multiple plans on multiple solutions to get us to a budget that stays whole over the long run.
Okay.
Rachel, any thoughts or any comments on workload related to this, and whether or not it's something you have the ability to support us on at this point, given everything the radio has? You can.
Okay. What else?
Well, I do have 3 or 4 others if you'd like to talk
Please.
about them.
Yeah.
I did mention this morning that I'll be over in Salem on the 24th. It turns out there's 2 meetings. There's the one that's being convened with both Senator Weber and Representative Javity, and then former Senator Johnson and a few others, including our local forester here, and also the head of the department, Yakamoto, I believe is his name. And then there's another one, and Mr. Starr, you might be there. They have I second the Forest Trust Land Advisory Council. Will you be at that one?
I will be at that one. That's Friday, the 24th,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I will,
So-
I will be at that one. My father-in-law's service is that afternoon, but I'm gonna go to Salem in the morning and I'll just drive directly to Portland for the service.
Okay, well, then you cover that and I'll do the other one and however long it goes.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Now, that happened to be the day of my radio show, but now, probably either one of you could instruct me how to record that in advance. Do you call Lisa or the
Yeah.
station, or how do you do
Yeah,
that?
just reach out to Lisa and she'll set a time.
Okay. All right, that's
I
one.
didn't know your father-in-law died. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Sympathy to you and Jim and Emily. Yeah, 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 that's hard.
The utility project, I'm reaching out to some people in Beaver and Hebo and Cloverdale. I'm gonna probably get to one of their meetings and see if there's a way, since they're three of the very smallest that have all these problems we've talked about in terms of cash flow and losing board members and all of that, and see if there's a way they can either come together or work together. And so I'll take that step. There's another group of 5 up here out towards Fairview, that 5 utilities, small utilities that all buy from the city.
Are we talking water?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then separately, there are a couple of issues also with the wastewater side of it. That's a little more complex and a little more localized. Water, you can extend beyond your boundaries, not so much with the other. It's precluded, I think, under state law. So anyway, I'll keep all that moving and see if we can come to some resolution and then meet again maybe in late June. When I looked at the sign-up list, I think it was just over 50 people, and there were probably 6 or 8 who should have been there, but between the online group and others, the room was full. You were there, and so I'll keep that moving. And then we talked about the budget. The radio project, we have a meeting in Garibaldi tomorrow, and then on Friday, I believe we're interviewing the firms that will help us get through some marketing efforts and tell our story and all of that, so things are moving. And then I went to the Fair Board last night, which is always a treat if you've had enough sleep to stay up late with those people. And there are 5 of them, just very ambitious, good people. And I guess what I would report with we'll be interviewing for 2 more members, maybe as many as 2. I think there's 3 applicants. It could be that none of them would be suitable, don't know. But we're in the process of setting it up. I'm gonna need to reschedule it. But the bigger issue with the Fair Board, they're still wanting to do fireworks. And so here's what I told them last night. I said, okay, first of all, it's the fire chief, and I know the fire chief's last day is today. So there's a new fire chief here. But somebody speaking on behalf of Tillamook Fire says you're okay under these certain conditions and draws it out. That's step 1. If they can get that, and I don't think they have it, then they go to the insurance people, to Cheryl, and say, how is this going to be insured, and are you comfortable doing it? How much does it cost? Cheryl then would probably come to the county and try to talk us into it, or have the Fair Board. And so what I have told them, that it's a really, really long shot, and I'm not sure that I personally would support it, because they're going to run out of time, and it's not at all clear to me that they're going to clear all these hurdles. And I personally can't imagine putting the county on the hook for rather extensive liability, since it's surrounded by houses. They have smaller shells than some of the big shows, but they still go up, and sometimes they don't come down where you think they'll come down. And if they come down in the wrong place, you may have a fire. I mean, all these issues.
Do they want to do it on the 4th of July or at the fair?
They want to do it on the 6th, 2 days after. They want to do it on the weekend after the 4th of July. And the Fair Board, the total
For
cost.
fun? I haven't heard the backstory. Just for fun, or for an event, or?
Well, it would be an event. It would be the fireworks for Tillamook, so you don't have to drive to Rockaway or somewhere else. You can come right here and enjoy yourself on Saturday night. There's issues with the street and closure that I don't think they've solved. There's issues with insurance that we haven't heard from, and whether it would require a rider. And if there's a liability or something goes wrong, is there a trailing liability back to the county? The person who does it is an individual. He's not a corporation, so he has no insurance. but he does have a pyrotechnician's license, and has been doing it privately for years and years and years. So then, if they bring in the insurance, then do we say, and have the risk people, Bill has been very reluctant to give his blessing without knowing more in terms of the legal side of it and what would be the extended liability. Having done fireworks myself or helped set them up, I get really nervous because in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, we've had 2 fires in Pacific City. And these were shells that were being shot out over the ocean, but the wind comes from out that way and blows it back, and pretty quick, you had 2 fires. Now, the fire department down there stationed their units around town, and so they were on it quickly, and it was a matter of, 10 minutes till they put it out. But when you set someone's yard on fire, that's not the best thing you can do from a PR standpoint or liability or anything else. And I'm reluctant to really encourage them because I can see even if and the whole thing is about a $10,000 expense, and it's not at all clear how they're going to recover $10,000 because you don't have to enter the premises. You can park across the street and still have a pretty nice view of fireworks. And so we talked about all these things, and I keep throwing up these little what ifs. And but the enthusiasm and the energy of these people, it's hard to stop. And I give them high marks for that. But they're bound and determined to have a fireworks show, even if they end up losing money. And they're talking now, we get a youngster that's really cute and have him or her go around with a bucket and collect $10,000. I mean, this is.
Are we talking about a beer garden, like people paying admission?
Well, they might do that, but then the flip side is you could park, a couple hundred yards away and still see the show.
Yeah.
But some would, and no
The
doubt that
college.
they
Bring your own beer.
Right next door.
they would get some money, and no doubt some people would put in, and this individual has passed the hat before and collected several $1,000s on his private property, but that's another matter. And so anyway, this may be coming to us here over the next couple of weeks because they are going to run out of time. And I told them, if you don't have this completely in place by first part of June, I don't see it happening. I mean, there's just not enough time to do it. But he wants $8,500 for his services and the fireworks. And so I'm just reporting out what
All right,
the
that's interesting.
conversation,
It
and
is
if it comes
interesting.
before the 3 of us, we can make a collective
fine, thank
decision,
you.
Thanks, Rachel.
but it's an uphill.
Okay.
So that's all, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. How about you?
I think I covered what was on my list. Stuck it on there today, so.
Okay. The only other thing I had was I got a note today, and I should have brought this up before Rachel left, but I'll fill her in, about the Firewise program. This person asking, it's kind of funny, he sent me this email and it says, "This is really to all of the commissioners, but I was just too lazy to write it out 3 times."
Oh, there you go.
He says, "I had a nice chat with a lady at the forestry department asking if the yard debris program was coming back. She said the funding for the program was in the hands of the county commissioners. Decision had not been made to fund it or not. I don't think it comes back before us until June. I just read on Facebook the funding may start at the end of June. Honestly, this is probably too late for many as the piles are getting large and need to be hauled off or burned before the burn ban takes effect. Please appreciate your consideration, past funding, urge you to fund the program as soon as possible or let the public know when and if it might happen." So what I recall from last year is that the Dave McCall made a request to the Department of Forestry to go ahead and pre-fund the program based on an assumption that we were going to fund it based on our past practice of funding it, because we couldn't guarantee that we're going to fund it without the vote to fund it.
Right.
And we can't do the vote until is it a 30-day waiting period?
45-day
45-day waiting period.
I think.
So we can't guarantee it. We can't vote on it yet. We do have multiple years past practice of funding it. We could verbally tell them, we've done this before, like, yes, it's our intention to to commit about half of those funds, because that's what we've always done. But we would have to, the Department of Forestry did work with us on that before, and maybe they would again. And do we want to have the conversation with them? Because the writer is correct in that that's late. Like it should start sooner than that.
Sure. No, I feel like we run into this every year, and I've answered a few questions on Facebook about it, just letting people know federal funding, we're in the middle of the process, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, I had forgotten that we had done that. We had them front it.
You want to ask him again?
Yeah, I think it's worth
should
an
we?
ask. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that to give you an answer. Sounds like it's been done before, at least in
Yeah.
part.
Okay. All right. So I'm willing to ask. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then I'll report back. Do you have any thoughts on that? No? Okay. All right. Do you have anything? No? Oh, I don't blame you. Yeah, I bet. I'm glad you feel a little better. I was worried about you. You sounded like you were really sick.
No, it's just allergies.
Allergies?
Yeah.
Yeah. They do seem particularly bad this year. But I think that every year, I wonder if the pollen count actually, there may be something to this that through climate change, that as we're having warmer winters, et cetera,
Yeah.
that the pollen count is actually higher.
I haven't been that bad unless we haul hay out the field.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
But see all the trucks going by,
Yeah.
stuff on the road.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's all
my
out
car's
there.
covered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even I was working in my garden on Mother's Day, and I would like some of my flowers are growing, of course, and I was looking at the leaves thinking, are these leaves already diseased? Like they get rust or
Yeah,
powdery,
yeah.
mildew or whatever. And I was brushing them off, and it's not, it's pollen. Yeah.
It's that much in
Yeah.
the air.
Yeah. So, okay. So you don't have anything else? We don't have anything else? Anybody online? Who do we have online? Anybody have something for the good of the order? Joel, thank you for hanging in with us. Randy, you got anything?
Nope, I was just listening in to see what great topics you were going to be covering this afternoon.
All right.
And the Firewise, that's interesting because Bay City had a 2-day event to where you just hauled everything down to their big parking lot from across the street from their city offices with your debris. And it was a very good success
That's great.
there. And so, I don't know if other cities will be doing that same thing or not, but it was really kind of a nice thing because that is the big question that I've been getting too is what about our vouchers? When do we get our vouchers this year? So
Yeah, for sure.
it's on a lot of people's mind.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Joel, nothing from you? You popped
No,
in.
Madam Chair, thank you.
All right. Thanks for being with us, hanging in there with us. Well, if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting at 3:15 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. See you later.